It was June 13th, 1977. Three little girls would be found dead the day after they'd been dropped off at Camp Scott, just outside of Locust Grove, Oklahoma. And for a year, the hunt for the main suspect in the case would dominate the news until he was caught and brought to trial. But even that is just the beginning of this tragic and bizarre tale.
Follow the signs to the end of the road. Don't let the rain make you lose control. And don't be afraid when it's time to go. Just follow your signs to the end of your road.
Camp Scott had been a retreat for Girl Scouts, but this crime would not only end that tradition, it would end the camp entirely. Its ruins are still there, as a ghostly reminder. The controversy that surrounds this case not only involves the homicides themselves, but includes racism, neglect on the part of the camp counselors, and inadequate detective work. Much of it can be explained away as the naivety of the era when it comes to crimes against children. But many of the accusations seem quite valid, especially when examining not only the night of the murders, but the months leading up to them, when those in charge of the facility ignored horrible warning signs. So let us begin with the day in question. June 12th, 1977. Girl Scouts of varying ages arrived at Camp Scott. Many had been there the previous years, such as 9-year-old Michelle Gousset. But for 8-year-old Lori Lee Farmer and Doris Denise Milner, age 10, this would be their first time away from home for what was to be 2 weeks of Girl Scout activities.
Well, I saw the light glow from your window as I left you last night. And don't sweat the little things.
Thunderstorm would arrive. All activities were cut short, and the girls would be ushered to their tent. As was normal for the time, all three of the girls would write letters to home as they prepared to go to bed. Around 9 p.m., all the girls were told to finish their letters. Then lights out. But at 6 in the morning of June 13th, camp counselor Carla Wilhite was walking to the shower and spotted a sleeping bag lying on the ground at the base of a tree. As she walked closer, she could see a body, nude from the waist down, hands tied behind her back and gagged. Wilhite did not attempt to render aid because it was painfully obvious that the girl was beyond help. Quick search of tent number 8 revealed that the 3 girls were missing. Bloodstains on the wooden floor indicating something terrible had happened. Now they knew who the children were. The first law enforcement officer to arrive at the scene was Highway Patrol Officer Harold Berry, believing at first that he was going to be investigating the scene of a tragic accident. Instead, he would find that he was going to be investigating a homicide. He did the best he could to secure the immediate crime scene, but it would be several hours before the entirety of Camp Scott could be secured sufficiently. Buses would be entering and leaving the camp, taking the girls back to the headquarters in Tulsa. The local media had congregated outside the gates. The parents were told that an accident had occurred, forcing the camp to be closed. The victims' families were also led to believe that an accident had claimed the lives of their children, only to learn later that their children had actually been murdered. As investigators dug deeper, and all involved had been questioned, it became apparent someone was lurking in the woods in between the hours of 10 p.m. and 3 a.m., roaming the grounds of the camp, looking into tents. Many pieces of evidence corroborated the stories being told. Even without the murders, this was a night of terror. Yet despite all of this, the killer had the time to subdue 3 little girls, beat and rape each one, attempting to clean the crime scene with bed sheets, carry 3 bodies 150 yards from their tent, First, let's look at the layout of Camp Scott. It consists of close to 500 acres. Much of the land was paid for with the sale of Girl Scout cookies. At the time of the murders, the land was operated by a company called Magic Empire. The map behind me shows a rough layout of the area where the murders took place. Now, all the campsites are named after American Indian tribes. The red triangle represents Kiowa, where tent number 8 is located. The counselor's tent is about 80 yards southeast of tent number 8. The red dot, I believe, is the shower building, which partly obscures tent number 8 from the counselor's tent. And Quapaw, east of Kiowa. With the following accounts, the movements of the killer can possibly be traced, perhaps gaining insight on why he risked being seen, how he chose tent number 8, and the most important question, did he work alone? At the Comanche unit, south of Kiowa, the counselor notices what appears to be a flashlight just inside the woods. Knowing there shouldn't be anyone there, she pointed her flashlight to it, and the light went out. She turned off her flashlight, and after a couple of minutes, the light in the woods would come back on, heading in the direction of Kiowa. Again, she turned on her flashlight and pointed to it, and again the mystery light went off. and did not come back on, and the counselor decides to return to her tent. No time is given here, other than it was shortly after the tent lights had all been put out. The next possible disturbance occurs at the Quapaw unit, when a very scared little girl claimed that someone tried to grab her. Other girls also claimed they were hearing someone walking around their tents, and one girl cited at least one, possibly two men in the woods. At the time, counselors would chalk it up to first night jitters. Again, no time is given for this incident, other than probably around lights out time. About 1:30 a.m., Carla Wilhite and the elders would have to retrieve some girls who were slamming doors at the latrines. A few moments later, they began to hear a strange sound in the woods. At first they thought it was the girls misbehaving again, but quickly realized it was not the girls. It was a low, guttural sound, like some type of growling or moaning. It was coming from the direction of the nearby road, and they walked to it. After reaching the road, Carla shone her flashlight in the direction of the noise, and it stopped. They stood there for some time until they gave up on hearing it again, and they walked back to their tent. At that time they believed it to be some sort of animal. After going to sleep, possibly around 2 or 2:30 a.m., at the counselor's tent, somebody quietly unscrewed the hooks that held the tent flap, stole both women's purses and Carla's glasses. Around this time, the girls in Tent 7 were awakened by a man raising a tent flap and looking in with a flashlight. One girl was certain she saw a shadowy figure of a man, but she could not see the features due to the flashlight in her eyes. He backed away and lowered the flap, walking in the direction of tent number 8. Police began to put together a list of known sex offenders in the area. One of those names on the list became most prominent, a Cherokee man by the name of Gene Leroy Hart. But there was one problem with bringing Hart in for questioning. For the last 4 years, Hart had been on the run after having escaped Mays County Jail in 1973. Reinvestigating Hart's original crimes began to raise some curious details, enough to convince a judge to charge Hart with first-degree murder and begin the largest manhunt in Oklahoma history. Now we can probably get into some of the reasons why they looked at Hart so closely. There were other suspects, which we will get into, but it's the circumstances that surround Hart's crimes in the past and comparing them to what happened at Camp Scott. In June of 1966, Hart didn't go to work. Instead, he abducted 2 young pregnant women from the parking lot of a Tulsa nightclub. Now, details are a little unclear, but it appears that he forced one of the women to ride in the trunk with the other one in the car with him, and he would drive them across town into Mays County to a very remote wooded location. Both women wore prescription glasses. Hart would take the glasses from the women and try them on to see if the prescription would fit him. When he finally arrived in Mays County, he would take the first woman that rode with him, brutally beat her and tie her up, and rape her. While the one in the trunk listened, and the things that she heard mostly were strange sounds that Hart made as he was raping the first woman. Then he would take the second woman out of the trunk, beat her, tie her up, and also rape her. He then put duct tape over both of their faces and pretty much expected them to die. After he left, the second woman managed to get herself free and her friend. I guess they picked Hart out of a lineup. Now, for reasons I'm not sure about, he was only charged with raping one of the women and 2 counts of kidnapping. He pled guilty and spent 28 months in prison in Mays County. He was let out early. A few months later, he would be arrested for burglary, the details of which will be covered later. He escaped from Mays County Jail by sawing his way out with a saw that someone had brought him, and for 4 years, from the time that he escaped to when the girls were murdered, he spent 4 years in roughly the same area. He did not seem to leave the Locust Grove area.
Saw the light glow from your window as I left you last night.
Now, here's when things begin to go wrong, when it comes to eventually what happened. This was something that took a long time to manifest. And so we cannot blame everything that happened on how certain things were handled in those times. But there were problems beginning to develop. Problems that were not there in 1928. 50 years later, something had begun to creep into the woods. Predators had moved in. Human predators. And now I will tell you why I chose this story. Most of the stories that I do with this edition of Paramusic TV have somehow been an interest of mine for whatever reason that may be, and this one, I grew up not too far from this area. I was about the same age as those girls. I just turned 9 years old when this happened. My birthday's June 7th, and this happened in June 13th of that year. As a matter of fact, the month of June seems to mean something to or for Gene Leroy Hart. We will look at that soon, but there are paranormal elements to this story as well. But I grew up in the area, and I remember watching the manhunt for Gene Leroy Hart. You know, every night there'd be something on it, on the news. Either he was sighted somewhere, or some evidence had been found that he had been somewhere, you know, all that kind of thing. And I think these people that were in his similar circumstances, running from something or homeless, the camp, I think, had begun to attract the attention of a certain kind of person, like slow vultures surrounding this place. And I think some of these people were aware of each other, and probably in lieu of killing one another, they made deals to, okay, I'll stay here, you stay there, maybe we can work together, help each other out, but, I gotta learn to trust you, all those things. This was not anyone's fault. However, as you will see, there were some things that happened that should have been addressed. In April of '77, a couple of months before the camp was slated to open for the Girl Scouts, in the counselor's tent, during a day of orientation, a donut box was found, and inside it was empty of donuts, but there was a note, and the note stated, they addressed themselves in the plural form. They were a group intending to kill whoever was in tent number 1. But I guess there were other portions of the note that referred to aliens and things of that nature, and it was disregarded as a joke, and the letter was subsequently thrown away. Then, just a day or two before June 12th, it was discovered that some of the tents had been slashed. Of course, nobody knew exactly why that might be. I think some believe now that whoever killed the girls was maybe trying to make a place where it was easier for him to enter quickly and do what he did. But anyway, all of these signs were basically ignored. So maybe they shouldn't be quite so blamed for this particular aspect of the whole case, but it does seem like to me if they'd have taken these things more seriously, maybe hired a security guard, that probably would have been the best thing to do. These letters, whether they were pranks or the real thing, they should have looked at the fact that somebody had their eyes on the camp and it was a dangerous situation. That's not necessarily the fault of the counselors, because they were told in the event that they saw people, which happened quite often, according to Carla Wilhite, once in a while people might venture into the camp looking for directions. There were several other incidents where people who had no business being on the camp ended up being on the camp at one point or another. And basically they were just told to handle it by telling them to leave, that this was, private property. But clearly this had grown beyond that.